Today on Locked On Canadiens, who might be available to the Habs as free agency is literally tomorrow by the time you're listening to this. Plus, the Canadiens were really busy today in advance of that. And finally, some listeners have asked us to discuss Wright versus Slafkovsky one last time, and we will do that in just one moment on Locked On Canadiens.
For Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 655 of Locked On Canadiens, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. We're free and available 5 days a week, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. My name is Laura Saba. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Matlove, Habs Eyes on the Prize. And Scott, we have a special guest joining us for tomorrow's episode. How excited are you for that?
I am very, very excited. This is the guest we tried to book before the draft, but extenuating circumstances canceled that. We are going to have Tony Ferrari back on the show. We're going to do a live show for y'all, which I realized tomorrow was Tuesday, which will lead into our free agency, nonsense. I will be around for that. We're going to have Tony on. He's going to help us debrief the draft because we are not prospect experts. We just play ones on this podcast. We're going to have Tony back. He's going to help us break down Slafkovsky, Meshar, Lane Hudson, Owen Beck, all these picks for you. Get to ask him questions in real time. We cannot wait. We hope you will join us. We are aiming 7:30 Eastern. We're going to go about 35 minutes or so, and we're going to give all of y'all a chance to pick Tony's very big prospect brain on everything. We are very, very excited, and we're very glad Tony can join us and make time for us in that.
Tony is one of our favorite people, and I do think that we do need a prospect expert to break down the moves the Canadiens did. We have a lot of opinions, but Tony is somebody, particularly with the number of OHL picks the Canadiens made, Tony has a lot of concentrated expertise on that area. But that's all tomorrow. Today, what we want to discuss is later in this episode, we're going to talk about who might be available to the Habs in free agency, given that qualifying offers were due today, and a lot of teams made some surprising decisions, which aren't so surprising if we look at the context. We're going to talk about that later. We're going to talk about what the Canadiens did today, which is the day that we're recording this, which is Monday, and that's going in our second segment. But in our first segment, we just want to put something to rest because a lot of listeners have brought this up and they want us to kind of weigh in on it. And that's fair because it is a topic of conversation that we're seeing. And that is the idea that, Shane Wright not only was death staring the Canadiens table when Seattle picked him, but also that he was liking Instagram comments and tweets that were derogatory towards Slafkovsky. And so what I did was I went back and I tried to look at everything I could find on this. And when Slafkovsky was picked first, which was a surprise to both of them, I think, Shane Wright got up and congratulated him, right? And then later on, when Shane Wright was picked behind the scenes, they congratulated each other. There were hugs. Proud of you, buddy. Congratulations, buddy. Like, these two have probably spent a lot of time together in recent weeks, not just at the Combine, but all the events that top prospects get invited to. And I don't think that there is any animosity between the two players or Shane Wright against Slafkovsky. I do think, though, that it is entirely normal for somebody who gets told for years and years that they're the next number one overall pick. When they slide down, there's got to be some ego, a bruise to the ego. And I don't necessarily think that, even if he felt led on by the Habs, even if he felt that the Habs gave him the impression that they were going to pick him first or anything like that, like, I don't think that, him saying that the Habs made a mistake is too far out of the realm of somebody who's competitive, who's at the top of, or had been at the top of people's lists. Like, I don't necessarily see it as an indicator of a big problem because, as I've learned in recent days, is if somebody really is a problem personality, they will drop much further than fourth overall, right? Like, there are very logical reasons why he went fourth, right? The Canadiens picked Slafkovsky because that's who they liked better. And then New Jersey was very enthralled with Shimon Nemec, and they they didn't really make that much of a secret of the fact that they had wanted Slafkovsky. In the absence of that, they took their next best player. The Arizona Coyotes said they wanted a U.S. player. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I don't know if it's so that they can, have the local fans be interested in him more, or maybe they like the U.S. League more, or the NCAA, like U.S. development more. It was definitely a focus on picking a U.S. player. So that left the Seattle Kraken, who were probably planning to take, Nemeth or Yarashek or somebody like that, when Shane Wright became available to them and he was picked to them. So I think for me, it's like, it's possible that he didn't interview well. I don't think necessarily that, it's an indicator of a huge deal, because I went back. I rewatched the Kent Hughes press availability, the one with Martin Lapointe and Nick Bobov, and even Shane Wright's interviews. Like I said, the social media of them hugging and all of that. Like, I went back and I looked at it, and I really just think that the Canadiens really just wanted Slafkovsky, and Shane Wright thought that he deserved, that he had done all he could to be the number one overall pick, and that's just not the way it shook out. And now it's okay for him to have a chip on his shoulder and work really hard to prove the Canadiens wrong. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I just think that, we don't necessarily have to. He's already out of town. We don't need to run him out of town.
Yeah, I look at it this way, is that I go, yeah, when you're the guy who was supposed to be the guy from the time you were 15 and joined the OHL, and it all kind of slips at the last minute, you're probably a little bit ticked off. Like, I get it. I've been a teenager once too. You have a chip on your shoulder. Staring down the Habs table isn't going to intimidate anyone sitting there when you consider who's sitting at that table. Martin Lapointe. You have Martin St. Louis, who was halfway through a bag of chips. Vincent Lecavalier. All these people, you can act tough, but it doesn't matter unless you can prove it on the ice. Philip Zadina said he was going to fill the Canadiens' net with pucks, and I get it. And at the same time, I'm finding it very hard to care that he did it. It happens. It's hockey. It's not always fair. The one thing I heard is that at the combine when they did interviews, Wright did not interview well. There was things about responsibility and this, and when faced with adversity, he didn't, kind of take on that burden. Slafkovsky, they said, hey, you do this. And he went, okay. And then he went and they looked and he's working on these things. He takes it as a challenge to get better. Shane Wright kind of didn't seem to do that in his interviews. And for teams, if you don't want to take responsibility for your own actions, it's a huge red flag for teams, especially the Canadiens. There's a lot of responsibility that's going to go on these players in the next couple of years here. There's a lot of rebuilding that's going to happen. We look at Slafkovsky today at development camp, and the kid's cocky, bordering on arrogant, but has that fine line walked perfectly. He broke a Wingate bike, and then when asked about it, said, I'm going to damage everything in this gym. How do you not love that? He's very confident, and he knows what he wants.
He's intense.
And the thing is, I love that. He's even if fans didn't want Yuri Slavkowski, I obviously was on the Shane Wright and we wanted Shane Wright. He's making people believe very, very quickly. And I have nothing bad to say about Shane Wright. It's all going to shake out on the ice one way or the other. In 10 years. Yeah. Sorry, it's like, I get that there are people that this is a lot about, the draft is like, I want to dislike. I'm like, I don't care. I understand it. Have that chip on your shoulder. That's what motivates you. You go right ahead. If that's going to help you reach that next level, go right ahead. But if you're going to let it stew on it for longer than you need to, that's your own thing there. I want to put the Wright versus Slafkovsky debate to bed until we play the Kraken at some point this season. Then we can reopen this book at whatever point that is. But for now, I think here at Locked On Canadiens, we will talk to Tony about this a little bit. But Laura and I, we are closing up the book on this unless something drastic happens. We are done. Yuri Slavkowski is a Montreal Canadien. Shane Wright is a Seattle Kraken. And that's the end of the story right now. Until they take the ice, we don't know.
And the beginning of another story is Yuri Slavkowski is 18 years old. Literally, I think it was Arpin Basu that pointed it out. He just had his braces taken out on March 30th, right? He's a young one, and I think he's going to develop and he's going to do everything he can. He seems to have embraced that challenge. So here on out, Locked On Canadiens is Locked On Slafkovsky. In the meantime, we're going to talk about the qualifying offers and a couple of signings the Canadiens made and what they mean for the team going forward, and that's all coming up in our next segment. But first, let me remind everybody about Built Bar. Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. We're talking about being intense and breaking Wingate bikes. If you want the energy to do that, I highly recommend you grab a Built Bar. It tastes like a treat, and it's going to give you the energy that you need. It is high in protein, low in sugar. They're all made with real chocolate, and they have so many delicious flavors. There's so many incredible flavors. Every time I turn around, they're coming up with something new, and they always sound like a delicious, delicious treat. So good. And if you want to check out Built Bar and you want to know all the things that we're talking about, and you want that energy, you can take it on the go with you. You know, a 3 p.m. pick-me-up if you need. Take it hiking with you like Scott does. You can go to built.com and enter promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That is built.com, and the promo code is LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. All right, the Canadiens were busy today, Scott. They did a lot of things. They didn't do a certain thing that has fans up in arms. So let's have a quick discussion. The first thing that they did, the first thing that we heard was that they had signed Corey Schueneman to a contract, and then we heard that Michael Pezzetta will be brought back on a contract. I thought those were two very tidy pieces of homework that they needed to do. I was excited to see both of them back. The Canadiens are obviously high on Corey Schueneman, but they probably know that he's probably not part of that contending core that they're talking about, but he's a really, really serviceable guy. I've said the word serviceable quite a few times in the last couple of days, but like Corey Schueneman, to me, I think the Canadiens like him because he's reliable and he's consistent. He's not going to be Cayden Primeau good, but they like him. They need him for depth. They've signed him. I think that they've done a great job. As for Michael Pezzetta, it's a short contract. It's not very long. I think they like having him around the team. I think they just like him as a player, as a personality, as somebody who pushes everybody to be good. You know, we've heard the other players talk about how intense he is and how much energy he brings. So I think they've brought those two back for a short period of time because I think their long-term plans might not include these players, but for the short term, they're players that the Habs like, that the fans like, and the coaches seem to like.
I look at it this way, is that both guys, Corey Schueneman got 1 year, 2 way, so he gets paid different AHL and NHL. It's not whether or not he can be sent down. And Pozzetta got a 1-way deal. I think this is hey, things are going to get real crowded here real soon. This is your year to prove that you can stick around. I think Corey Schueneman will start the year with the Rocket, at least for a little bit. And I think he's going to be that guy on the cusp there, right, with like Otto Leskinen. They're going to need veteran guys still in Laval because not everyone can be in the NHL and not all the prospects can be in the NHL. You need bits and pieces to go back and forth here. And I think Martin St. Louis really likes Corey Schueneman. He really did. He was very complimentary of Corey Schueneman right after he took over as coach when Schueneman scored his first NHL goal, got his first couple points there. Martin St. Louis loved him. And we've talked about Michael Pezzetta a lot on this podcast, is that he went from fourth line AHLer to a guy who was taking regular NHL shifts, playing in the not top six, but, in the middle six there and taking regular shifts, and was a regular NHLer in the lineup there. And he's improved leaps and bounds. I think they love that energy. And he's there. He's like, hey, if you're playing in that bottom six and you're not trying, I'm going to be the one trying. I'm going to be right on your heels the entire time. And I like that. They're rewarding guys who are putting in the effort. And I think that's really important. Where it shakes out this season, I don't know, because I keep forgetting Evgeny Dodonov's on this team. Jonathan Drouin is coming back. Mike Hoffman exists. Yuri Slavkowski is on the team as of right now. People are penciling him in to be in the NHL. Whether or not that's a little presumptive, who knows? But the thing is, in their non-qualifying offers, I suppose we should talk about who they did qualify.
Yes.
Cayden Primeau, Joël Teasdale, Nate Schnarr, Samuel Montembeault. I'm missing someone else in here off the top of my head. But I know the big one that people are upset about is they did not qualify
Rem Pitlick.
Rem Pitlick. He is the biggest one, and that's the one people are, I guess, upset with. But at the same time, there's a reason for this. And the biggest thing is that he's eligible for arbitration. And based off of him having a career season where he shot, they qualified Kirby Dach. Duh, there we go. That was the fifth one because I forgot he is also on the team despite just trading for him. Rem Pitlick going to arbitration is probably going to get a contract worth $3 million or so. The Canadiens cannot afford that because he's not going to shoot 22% next year and score 15 goals again. They like Rem Pitlick, the player. They do not like Rem Pitlick, the player, for $3 million a season. Like, that's too much.
I would absolutely agree. And you'll notice that a lot of teams did that. They didn't qualify a lot of arbitration eligible players because when that arbitrator makes a decision, it's usually binding. And what usually happens, even though I don't necessarily think that it's fair, but the common convention is, and it doesn't always happen, but the common convention is when there is an RFA, the team will extend an offer, the players' camp will extend a counteroffer, and then the arbitrator will decide exactly in the middle of that. So what is stopping from Rem Pitlick and his agent saying, I want $6 million? And then getting whatever's between the Habs and what, you know what I mean? So I think that it's definitely one of those things where a lot of players that are quality players were not qualified by their teams. And in our next segment, we are going to talk about who those players are and the possibility that they might be available to the Montreal Canadiens come free agency, which is, Wednesday at noon. I think a really important thing about all of this is that it doesn't necessarily mean that Rem Pitlick won't be back with the Habs. I mean, we just saw, I can't remember which player it was that wasn't extended a qualifying offer, but then was signed to a deal like very shortly afterwards this afternoon. I honestly cannot remember. I just remember looking at that. Do you remember who it was? Was it Nashville?
I don't.
Was it?
I'm not 100% sure, but that actually was the next one I was going to bring up. It's just because he wasn't qualified doesn't mean they can't still sign him to a deal. He still will hit free agent status on Wednesday, but until that time, the Canadiens can negotiate a new deal. And if they bring in Pitlick at a number that's more palatable, great. If not, you got him for free. You're not losing literally anything. Like,
right.
There's no downside to that. And I honestly think it's smart business by Ken Hughes. And I know people are upset because Pitlick was a very fun, bright spot on a very bad Canadiens team. But looking at this, through the lens of what's best for the team here, paying Pitlick $3 million a year based on an inflated shooting percentage is something Marc Bergevin would have done. And I know that sounds mean, but I don't think I'd be wrong in that analysis. Ken Hughes is playing this very smart, and I think, we're seeing some of the impact of their new front office alignment here. It's a smart move. It stinks. I like Pitlick a lot. He was free, though, and there's no harm lost in letting him walk to free agency either.
I do think so too, and I here's the thing is that I do think that Rem Pitlick will be back with the Canadiens. I honestly, because he was on waivers for a reason, right? And he was very serviceable to the Canadiens. He had a great, second part of the season or whatever under Martin St. Louis, and he was a fan favorite. I don't think that he's worth what he would have received, and therefore I don't think other teams are going to be, everybody is under a cap crunch. There are very few teams right now that are, struggling to reach the floor or have like plenty of room that aren't going to go after big name free agents. So he's gonna, he's either gonna get signed for a very economical deal, or he's gonna be on another team and we're gonna miss him and we're gonna be sad. And I think that's totally, it's just the way hockey goes. He's not an untouchable on this team. He never was. And as we saw, there were a couple of people that you would have thought that would be untouchable on this team that were promptly traded. So I think, this organization isn't necessarily married to any players other than Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki pretty much, and now Slafkovsky. But when in our next segment, what we are going to do is we are going to talk about who might be available to the Canadiens from other teams, whether it's because they have said they want to test free agency or whether it is because they did not get qualifying offers for their teams currently and might go to UFA on Wednesday at noon. And that's all coming up in just one moment. All right, Scott, where do you want to start with our potential people who might be available to the Habs?
All right, so I have three areas that I have identified as things that I personally would like. The first one being there are goalies out there now. And we know that the Canadiens have said they are not interested in trading Jake Allen right now. The demand is high. But out on the market right now, the Washington Capitals have let go Ilya Samsonov. They have not qualified him since he would be between $3.5 million. And that was too expensive for them for what they quoted as a backup goalie. They currently do not have a starting goalie because they traded Vitek Vanacek to the New Jersey Devils. Samsonov was a name that was rumored to the Canadiens closer to the trade deadline, and I think that's an intriguing option. Samuel Montembeault was obviously qualified by the Canadiens today, so they're potentially planning on offering him, I assume, a very cheap deal to keep him in the organization, probably bump him down to the AHL when that time comes. And then Mikey DiPietro of the Vancouver Canucks, a very good CHL goalie, has put up pretty solid numbers in the AHL as well, was not qualified, and with Thatcher Demko, it kind of makes sense that there isn't space for him, but I'm very shocked they let him go. If they're looking for another young goaltender, maybe not an NHL guy, but one to tandem with Cayden Primeau in the AHL, you have him right there. My thought is I'm almost wondering now, because as we're recording this, we're still waiting on the Matt Murray to Toronto trade to go through. Frank Cervalli just tweeted that he doesn't understand what the holdup is, but Ottawa's retaining at least 25% of Murray's salary. It feels like the market for goalies is going to get very, very hot very quickly. And I only see Jake Allen, who is an established piece, his value going up to the point that eventually Ken Hughes is going to have to go, I can't not take one of these deals. And then you have to hope that one of Samsonov or someone is out there. And I'm wondering if that's kind of what their plan is. Regardless, they bring back Montembeault, they have Samsonov, and they have Price. They trade Jake Allen for who knows what to a desperate team, and then they figure out their tandems from there and just kind of wing it in that regard because we don't know about Carey. I still don't like the idea of trading Jake Allen, but it looks more and more like it just the amount is going to be there. We do have the Matt Murray trade, by the way, from Sens Communication. The Sens have traded goalie Matt Murray while retaining 25% of his remaining salary, a third-round pick in 2023, and a seventh-round pick in 2024 to the Maple Leafs in exchange for future considerations. So literally nothing was that trade. Jake Allen is probably worth a whole lot right now on the market.
Absolutely. I think Jake Allen, out of all the available goalies, Jake Allen is one of the strongest ones. And he's on a very cheap deal. And that, I think, is the key here. Honestly, it will break my heart when it happens because I just think he's so great. But at the same time, the Canadiens are going to have to figure out the future of their goaltending anyway. Even if Carey Price was healthy next year, he's on the declining years. He's going to retire eventually. So I'm not too, I'm very pragmatic about this. I know the goaltending picture is going to change completely over the course of the next couple of years. Who knows? Maybe Cayden Primeau is going to attain his potential. Maybe Deschamps is going to attain his potential. There's some goalies in the pipeline that they're working on and that and that show some promise. So for me, I just think that losing Jake Allen this season will be sad. And if they don't lose him in free agency or during this period while, other teams are trying to figure out their picture, just imagine how much he's going to fetch at the trade deadline. Just imagine that, when all of the goaltending shakes out. But I think one of the other things that I wanted to talk about a little bit, really quick in our final moments, is there are some players that might potentially be available if the Canadiens can manage to dump out a bunch of cap space. I really don't see any of this happening, but players we know are going to be testing free agency. One, Evgeny Malkin, which was a huge shocker. Two, Darcy Kemper, who apparently wants a lot of money. And Nazem Kadri, who also apparently wants a lot of money. I think those are all players that are better for teams that are close to contending. I just think it's going to be really fun to see what happens on Wednesday.
I also look at David Perron is going to test free agency as well. And I know that there is a segment of the media that would love David Perron here. I don't know what he's going to want for money. I do not know what he's going to want for term. And I do not know if he wants to go to a rebuilding team in the back end of his career here when he probably wants to win another cup or go to another cup final or anything like that. The Canadiens should be looking at some of these other, like Malkin is a pipe dream, but Oh my God, would that be fun? Jake, sorry, you're going to have to give up 71 to Evgeny here, but could you imagine you put Slafkovsky on a line with Evgeny Malkin and you just let them go?
He's still a point per game player.
Don't tell
and
that
he's
to
30
Pittsburgh.
something. What?
35, yes.
35, yes.
Apparently he wants 4 years, which is, well, given his recent injury history, but it's like, it's Evgeny Malkin. Like,
right. And here's the thing, though, is that they, he wanted 4 years and Pittsburgh was like, we can't do that. But then you watch, like, Chris Letang get 6 years. Like, wouldn't you be annoyed AF? Like, I don't, I think Evgeny Malkin is doing the right thing by testing free agency. I personally think that he ends up on a team that seems closer to contending than they really are. It's going to be one of those weird ones. That's the feeling I get, because anybody who is close to contending does not have Evgeny Malkin money or 4 years to give him. I think it's going to be really fun. I know, it's a pipe dream, but I think it would be so funny to see him in Montreal. Maybe in a couple years when that 4-year deal is looking terrible for that other team. 2 years from now, Kent Hughes can go calling. I also think Nazem Kadri is another one of those where he's going to want a lot of money for a lot of time. And then by the time, by the time the Canadiens are contending, maybe he could be an option for them on a trade deadline deal as well. I don't think that any of these people are going to be the Canadiens. I don't even think that the Canadiens might even call them, right? The Canadiens have a lot of other priorities at the moment.
They have to move out salary first. And that's why names like Sam Steele, who wasn't qualified, Sonny Milano wasn't qualified by the Ducks. David Ferentz, who was not qualified by the Nashville Predators, has been on my list for a while.
Tell me about him.
He's played one full pro year. He signed that 2-year entry-level deal coming out of the NCAA. Played 1 year in the AHL last year, and Nashville didn't qualify him. He's mobile skater, offensive upside, was a real big scorer in the NCAA. Personally, he's from Rochester, so of course I have skin in that game. I think he fits for what Kent Hughes and everyone is looking for, and given Hughes's knowledge of Hockey East, he's got to be very aware of David Ferentz and what he did there. He's 23 and he wasn't qualified and let go. What Nashville has planned and why they didn't qualify him, I don't understand. But if you're looking for someone that you can probably get cheap, probably stash in the AHL for part of this year and use as a call-up option, it's right there. And I think it's a really intriguing option. Andre Kasha wasn't qualified. There's going to be a lot of these guys, that you can buy low on and maybe flip. You sign them to a 1-year deal, not a lot of money if you need to fill spots. And if they start thriving and, doing really well and you want to flip them at the deadline, you can do that and accrue more picks or re-sign them longer. It all depends on what you want to do. The world is Kent Hughes' oyster in terms of a lot of things here. I very much assume Jeff Petrie is going to get moved out in the very near future here. By sometime on Wednesday morning, I would expect him to be potentially gone, if not other people from the Canadiens organization right now. There's a lot that's going to happen, but there is so much out there for Hughes and Gorton, everyone to look at and go, this is what we want. They are not stricken by, well, we have David Savard and Mike Hoffman. All due respect to those players, the Canadiens have a much wider palette in front of them. Even if they're not going to get the Kadris, the Malkins, the Perrons, etc., there are still other options there for them.
Absolutely. And so I think we're going to keep an eye on that. I mean, by the time we post this episode, the picture might be entirely different, right? We're recording this around 8 p.m. on Monday night, and then it's going to drop just after midnight, and lots of things could have happened. But the key thing here is to follow us or subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. We are going live tonight by the time you listen to this with Tony Ferrari, one of our favorite people, and we're going to allow people to ask him questions in the chat as well about the Habs prospects that have been chosen in this year's draft. And that's all coming up on Locked On Canadiens. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. Like I said, you can also find us on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. You can ask your questions through there too. I will bring it up with Tony. And in the meantime, you can follow Scott on Twitter at Scott Matla, me on Twitter at The Active Stick. Thank you so much for listening, and make your second listen of the day Locked On NHL, where all the free agent frenzy will be covered this week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow or tonight live.